I used to work at Starbucks, serving lattes and assisting the never-ending line of caffeine-hungry customers. However, I once came into contact with something that still frightens me. Everything began when this one customer entered the store and sat down by the window. He had that look, you know, the kind that makes you think he's been through some serious stuff. I assumed he'd come in and leave with others, but hours passed and he was still there, drinking the same coffee and appearing to be lost in another world. I went about my routine, filling cups and smiling politely. As the day progressed, however, I couldn't get rid of the impression that this guy was unique. So I gathered my courage and went up to him. I questioned,
"Did you need anything else?"
He merely shook his head and murmured,
"No, I'm good,"
as he cast a cold gaze upon me. Although it gave me the chills, I continued working because I assumed it was just another strange day at Starbucks. I started packing up as my shift was coming to an end. I was happy to be returning home, but as soon as I stepped outside, I froze. The same guy was standing there, directly across the street. He was simply standing there and fixed his unblinking, unsettling gaze on me. I accelerated my pace while feeling my heart race and forbade myself from turning around to look behind me. My eyes resounded to the sound of my shoes clicking and clacking on the pavement. He was shouting something behind me, but it sounded like he was speaking a foreign language because the words were just jumbled. I ran for my apartment out of sheer panic. I frantically locked every window and door inside while exhaling raggedly. He was still outside when I peeked through the blinds, sporting a menacing grin. It appeared as though he had always known my address. My shaking fingers prevented me from making the police call. It was impossible to move because of the fear. The man did not move for several hours. He did nothing but wait while observing. It resembled a deranged game or an endless nightmare. When the morning finally arrived, the man had left. A glimmer of relief crossed my face as I cautiously went outside, but the unsettling influence of that stranger persisted, haunting me like a nightmare. The Starbucks job lost its appeal after that, but I never saw him again. Every client seemed to be a potential threat. I left in search of a new beginning far from that location. I still get shivers down my spine when I think about that eerie encounter. I won't soon forget this Starbucks horror story. Sometimes those lingering fears follow you long after you've left the coffee shop because there are some things you just can't explain. I made my way to the closest Starbucks because I was desperate for some coffee. None of it was unusual. It was just another typical evening. Taking in the warm atmosphere, I settled down with my coffee. I had no idea that what was going to happen to me at Starbucks would be a lifelong nightmare. Two men wearing masks burst into the store, appearing as though they had just escaped from a bad dream as I was sipping my latte. Their eyes were cold as ice, their faces concealed by ski masks. Panic swept the cafe like a tidal wave, and my heart pounded like a drum in my chest.
"Put your wallets and phones on the table,"
was the command that sent shivers down my spine, letting me know that this was serious. Without pausing, all began rummaging through pockets and bags, throwing valuables like phones and wallets onto a table. My eyes filled with tears as I reluctantly put my phone and wallet with the others. Our sense of security could be taken by these masked men along with our belongings. That was a serious infraction. With a look of fear on their faces, the Starbucks employees attempted to maintain their composure while also turning in their belongings. With lightning speed, the bandits gathered up the treasure as though they had done it 100 times before. A tall and intimidating robber stood by the door, making sure no one attempted to run away. Our belongings were gathered into a bag by the other, who was shorter but just as frightening. It smelled of vulnerability and dread. That Starbucks, a place usually filled with friendly banter and the smell of coffee. Then, as quickly as they'd appeared, they ran for the door and vanished like ghosts into the darkness. Our sense of security was shattered, leaving us in disbelief. It seemed like they had never been there at all because it happened so quickly. There was an overwhelming silence for a while. A few patrons were quivering, while others shed quiet tears, and the employees gathered close, attempting to comfort one another. Never before had I felt so violated and helpless. My coffee was cold, left unattended on the table. Shortly after, the police showed up and began interviewing people and going over security footage. Although they promised to use every resource at their disposal to apprehend those offenders, this did little to ease our concerns. We were scarred by the incident and began to doubt the security of even ordinary places. I felt a twinge of paranoia as I was leaving that Starbucks and couldn't resist looking over my shoulder. Despite disappearing into the night, the masked men had a lasting impression on my mental state. A routine coffee run had become a terrifying encounter, a genuine horror story from Starbucks that I will never forget. I was almost a regular at Starbucks once. I would always stop by in the morning to get my fix of caffeine, and the baristas would know what I wanted before I even spoke. My daily dose of familiarity was comforting. I was off my regular morning routine and ended up in an unusual situation one fateful night. In the late hours, I was working late into the night at Starbucks on a project. With just the barista on duty and a few stragglers glued to their laptops, the coffee shop was essentially empty. An uneasiness spread over me as I eventually finished packing and headed for the door. From behind me, in the shadows, I felt someone was watching me. I felt a shiver run down my spine as soon as I turned around. It was him. The counter employee who had given me my daily fix of coffee for months. He had a strange look on his face, one that blended desperation and longing.
"What would you like?"
I asked him. With a nervous shuffling of his feet, he blurted out,
"I love you. Every day. I adore having you here."
I stammered, my heart racing.
"I'm in a relationship, as you are aware."
He didn't appear to care, though.
"It doesn't matter.
He insisted.
You are what I want. I have the power to cheer you up."
I felt a wave of fear and realized that things were getting out of hand. The things I was hearing astounded me. I had to get away from this uncomfortable experience. I forced myself to tell him,
"I have to go."
After gathering all my courage.
"Just allow me to go, please."
But he didn't want to. He stretched his arms as if he was trying to give me a hug, and he made a determined attempt to grab hold of me. With all my strength, I pushed him away as panic overcame me. I ran out of the coffee shop, my heart racing, adrenaline pumping through my veins. My fear was heightened by the eerie silence of the deserted late-night streets. Verifying that he wasn't trailing me, I cast a quick glance behind me. Now, his face was twisted with rejection and rage as he stood up in the doorway. In a desperate attempt to forget that nightmare, I picked up my pace and moved closer to the security of my house. My heart was thumping so loudly my ears were ringing as I scrambled for my keys and dashed inside. I looked out the window and locked the door, but he was nowhere to be found. It was safe for me. That evening, I came to the realization that my favorite coffee shop, which had previously served as a safe haven for me, had turned into a terrifying place. My routine had become a nightmare because of the barista's infatuation. I couldn't bear to walk into that Starbucks ever again after that day. My haven had turned into a terrifying place, serving as a constant reminder that you can end up in the most unexpected and weird circumstances, even in the most familiar of environments. It used to be nothing out of the ordinary for me to work at the Starbucks checkout, except for the day the coffee shop became a terrifying place. The typical crowd was arriving and leaving on a gloomy afternoon. As I was examining the muffins and lattes, he casually entered the room. Unremarkable in appearance, the guy appeared to be just like the others. His coffee order was simple and cost him $22. Pricey, yes, but not my fault. He flipped his lid as I gave him the receipt. He exclaimed in a loud enough voice to draw attention.
$22? You gotta be kidding me, man!
I swear, I made an effort to clarify.
Hey, I'm just the cashier, I don't set the rates.
However, this man was not amused. With his eyes bulging with anger, he leaned over the counter and inched closer to me.
Do you think you can get away with this?
My heart was pounding wildly. I had encountered my fair share of irate customers, but this guy was unmatched.
The company sets the prices.
He was indifferent. He snarled menacingly.
I'll make sure you regret it if you don't make it free. Understood?
The cafe seemed to have become extremely cold. This strange, terrifying standoff had me in its grip. What do I do now was all I could think of. But then, the other patrons in line moved forward, like angels watching over me. A couple of students, a mother pushing a stroller, and a burly guy in a leather jacket. The psycho's nonsense was not going to get through them. The large man said,
Hey, back off. Leave the kid alone.
The psycho's eyes showed a glimmer of concern, and his arms were thicker than my legs. He didn't give up, though. Rather, he became irate and began yelling at everyone, as though he had misplaced his last screw. Pretending to call the police, the mother pushing the stroller took out her phone. She had nerves of steel, I have to admit. The psycho appeared to become alarmed upon seeing it. The students came next. Although they lacked the big guy's intimidating presence, they had something the psycho did not: numbers. They formed a wall of support behind the counter. It was amazing how these strangers band together to keep me safe from this crazy person. The psycho felt that he had overreached himself after that display of unity. He growled a few more derogatory remarks and threats, but his bark was more vicious than his bite. He hurled a crumbled $20 bill onto the counter. He slammed the coffee down and stormed out. The door behind him swung shut, relieving some of the tension in the cafe. Despite my shaking, I experienced an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the customers who supported me. This was an actual scary story about Starbucks that culminated in a heroic turn of events. The rest of the day passed as if nothing had happened, and we all exhaled with relief. I will never forget, though, how the other patrons came to be my lifeline. They were willing to shield a complete stranger from a frightening, crazy man. Although it wasn't the most enjoyable job, working the Starbucks checkout had its moments. Moments that serve as a reminder that kindness exists in the world, even in the most unexpected places. I was working as an employee at Starbucks, putting in my time on a daily basis. You're aware of the difficulties involved in serving lattes and macchiatos, dealing with picky patrons, and maintaining the smooth operation of an espresso machine. Up until the horror show brought on by the coffee, it was just another ordinary day. A new employee, Jack, came into my office one early and bright morning, looking as fresh as the roasted beans we served. That look, you know the one, hopeful and eager, was on his face. After clearing his throat, Jack said,
Hey boss, I was thinking, I've been here for a while. Possibly a pay raise is in order?
I leaned back and took a moment to observe him, considering the validity of his request.
Well, Jack, we usually wait a while to discuss pay increase because you're still relatively new here. Watch how well you adjust.
Jack's face contorted, and his ears seemed to be emitting steam. His fists clenched.
New? I've been working really hard here, handling Karen's ridiculous demands for frappuccinos, and there's never a break in the line at the drive-thru.
I tried not to panic, even though I knew I was in for a difficult ride.
Jack, I see how frustrated you are, but this is company policy. To assess your performance, we need some time.
That's when everything went south faster than a ruined coffee cup. Jack's scream could have woken the dead, and his face turned beet red. Sarah, a different employee, burst through the office door. Having been with us for some time, she had witnessed her fair share of chaos. Sarah hurried over to my side and took hold of Jack's arm, trying to pull him from my office. Grasping my office chair as a makeshift shield, I was in a hurry.
Let's just calm down, Jack. Come on, this is not okay.
However, Jack was not amused. On the edge, he was a barista. His tirade reverberated through the cafe like a malfunctioning espresso machine as Sarah and I battled to get him out of my tiny office. Clients gaped, their expressions a mixture of shock and astonishment. As they attempted to manage the surge at the counter, the other staff members stared in shock. While all of this was going on, Jack kept going on a coffee-fueled tirade about how unfair life, the universe, and everything was. After a tremendous amount of work, we were able to get Jack outside the office. I was struggling to breathe as Sarah held the door closed. At least Jack was no longer in my personal space, even though he was still shouting from the other side of the door. We persuaded Jack to take a break after he finally calmed down after what seemed like an eternity. Though the normal energy of the cafe returned, the horror show that was Starbucks lingered in my mind. I never imagined that managing a barista's tantrum would be part of working at Starbucks. That is the reality of working at a coffee shop. The customers are picky, the beans are roasted, and occasionally the staff finds too much of this harsh reality to bear.